As the 6-month anniversary of the Brexit vote nears, we still have no idea what's going to happen, nor what kind of a Brexit Britain really wants. Wednesday's vote in Parliament simply accepts that the June referendum is sovereign and that the 2-year clock on divorce negotiations with the EU should start next March. The will of the people is sovereign, no argument there. But what do the British people really want? As Britain's highest court now deliberates on whether in a parliamentary democracy it's Westminster that has final say on a mandate to negotiate, has direct democracy in the form of a referendum, well, permanently undermined liberal democracy and its institutions, not just in Britain, but throughout Europe. The Prime Minister herself was on record as opposing Brexit before the vote. So were a majority of lawmakers in the House of Commons. Is the current Parliament fit to rule or out of touch and irrelevant? At least in Italy, there's talk of snap elections now that the Prime Minister has lost a referendum there and resigned. Today in the France 24 debate, what does power to the people mean for Britain's parliamentary democracy? With us from London, Rory Broomfield, director of the Better Off Out campaign. Thank you for being with us. We welcome back Tom White. He voted Remain. He's a former UK trade negotiator. Thanks for joining us as well from the UK capital.
Hello, thank you for having me.
He covers all about this continent, islands included. Paris-based journalist Alex Taylor. Nice to see you again. As Paris tries to woo business from London, we're joined by FinTech Managing Director Anaïs Raoult.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And also Marina Niforos, business consultants, Logos Global Advisors. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
The France 24 debate, where you can weigh in on the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. 4 days of arguments now over, but the ruling from the Supreme Court won't be till January, in what's arguably the most important case that court has heard since its inception in 2009. The 11 judges deliberating over whether the power to take Britain out of the EU rests with Theresa May's government or with Parliament.
It bears repeating that we are not being asked to overturn the result of the EU referendum. The ultimate question in this case concerns the process by which that result can lawfully be brought into effect. As we have heard, that question raises important constitutional issues, and we will now take time to ensure that the many arguments which have been presented to us orally and in writing are given full and proper consideration. Having said that, we appreciate that this case should be resolved as quickly as possible.
Tom White, let me begin with you. What are you expecting from this Supreme Court ruling?
I suspect that the government will lose its appeal. Not so much because of the fundamental question about whether it has power to negotiate international treaties, but in many parts because of the way in which it has chosen to make the appeal, in that it's insisted that Article 50 is an irrevocable process. And I think that they will lose it and they will need to go to Parliament, but Parliament will essentially give them the green light to trigger Article 50. However, the fact of having this case has stimulated very extensive legal and academic debate about our Constitution, and I think this is only the first of many legal challenges to the government's approach to negotiations that we're going to see over the coming years. It's in particular exposed that there is an inherent contradiction from some of the Leave campaigners who, on the one hand, have said that this was a simple choice between Leave and Remain, and the government just needs to get on with it, and on the other hand, saying that June the 24th represents our Independence Day, and that this is a fundamental revolution about how our country is run and its place in the world, which of course is something with a lot of implications that need to be worked out by a lot of different stakeholders, including the Parliament. However, I think the real impact of a parliamentary vote on Article 50 will probably be to inhibit the quality of the final deal that the UK can secure, because it will, in effect, tie the government's hands with probably some unrealistic expectations of what can be achieved. And of course, parliamentary scrutiny is a feature of any international negotiation, and it's negotiation 101 that when you go into a negotiation, you often cite pressures from your domestic politicians for the positions that you take. But they are normally constraints that limit your ambition in the kind of treaty you can sign. And we have to remember that there will be politicians of all persuasions voting on amendments to an Article 50 bill that we may find actually goes against the interests of Remainers who want the closest possible relationship with the EU 27.
All right, so the idea is that the government won't be able to play its cards as close to its chest as it originally wanted, and that if it does go before a parliamentary vote before the negotiations begin, we'll have to see the choice between a hard and a soft Brexit. Just a reminder, on Wednesday, there was that non-binding vote in Parliament which agreed to the March start date. Still, anti-EU Conservative lawmaker Ian Duncan-Smith claims the Commons had given the government a blank cheque for Brexit. That's a matter of opinion. Mark Thompson explains.
The ayes to the right, 461. The noes to the left, 89.
A vote to back the government's Brexit schedule. British Prime Minister Theresa May plans to trigger Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty by the end of March next year. Brexit Secretary David Davis says the country's referendum in June gave the government a mandate to leave the European Union.
Many on the benches opposite pay lip service to respecting the result of the referendum, whilst at the same time trying to find new ways to thwart and delay.
Also passed, a motion put forward by the opposition Labour Party, which will see Parliament be able to scrutinise the government's proposals.
The government would then negotiate for 2 years without telling us any of that detail. For 2 years. Are any members of this House content not to know? Hands up who doesn't want to know. Doesn't want to know. Hands up. You don't want to know.
Despite pressure being applied by businesses and the financial sector in particular, Prime Minister Theresa May and her cabinet have so far been reluctant to disclose too many details about their targets. The government's timetable means the UK will be in line to leave the European Union in 2019 after 2 years of negotiations. EU representatives say they won't hold any informal talks with the UK before Article 50 is invoked.
Rory Broomfield, let me get your reaction and get your reaction to something that was said at the Supreme Court this Thursday. It's Scotland's top law officer who told the court that fundamentally this case is about who has the power to change the law of the land. Is it the Prime Minister or is it Parliament?
Well, that is a very valid question, and I suppose the Supreme Court will make its ruling in the new year. As you rightly say, it was the last day of hearing evidence for a 4-day period, and the Supreme Court will now adjourn to look at that evidence in more detail and come up with its findings in the new year. The key element, though, is whether or not the Supreme Court, like potentially if there is a vote in Parliament about the deal, the negotiating position, I should say, that the government starts with, is whether it binds the government's hands. We understand that actually the government is the counterparty in this negotiation. It will be a negotiation between the Council and the United Kingdom. It is not Parliament, therefore, that will be batting for Britain, battling away in the boardrooms of Brussels and elsewhere to get the best deal. So what we should see, what I hope to see, is whatever the Supreme Court and maybe even Parliament decides, is that they do not bind the government's hands in negotiating the best deal for Britain.
Alex Taylor?
I always find it rather contradictory that the Leave campaign, it was won on fears of immigration, but because most people didn't want to own up to that, apart from UKIP, the great argument which was always branded was the sovereignty of our parliament and not to be ruled by Brussels. And now we're in a situation where all the Leave campaigners are obliged to say, we don't want to give Parliament any say, really, because we have to keep our cards to our chest. But that for me is really shocking, because it means that the most important decision that my country has made since the end of the Second World War, in terms of, because this is not a general election where people can change their mind in 4 or 5 years' time. This is going to concern our children and my country's economy for the next 40 or 50 years. Are we going to stay in the single market or not, for example, is a very important decision. And the fact that the Prime Minister alone decides this, keeping her cards to her chest without any scrutiny whatsoever. That's what the vote yesterday was about, that she will have to produce some plan that people can say whether or not they think this is a good idea. Because, I mean, we have to decide as a country, and Parliament must have a say to know whether or not we're going to stay in the single market. It's massive in terms of jobs, in terms of the future of the economy. I can remember, I come from Britain. I left Britain at the end of the 70s when my country was the sick man of Europe. Its economy was in the doldrums. It was really very tough being in Britain in economic terms at the end of the 70s. Are we going to go back there again? I cannot understand why the Parliament, why Leavers, who went on so much about the sovereignty of Parliament, are not even allowing Parliament to have a say in the future economic matters of the country.
Rory Broomfield, the heart of the matter is that we have no idea on this side of the channel whether or not the government of Theresa May wants a soft Brexit, you know, kind of a Norway agreement where you have most of the bells and whistles of being an EU member, or a hard Brexit. Shouldn't Parliament be able to vote on that?
Well, firstly, that's the wrong dichotomy. It's very clear during the campaign that the then Prime Minister, David Cameron, and the then Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne, and indeed the Leave campaign, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer were on the Remain side, said that we would be leaving the single market if the people of Great Britain and Northern Ireland voted to leave on June the 23rd. And so that's a very clear understanding from the campaign itself that indeed that's the message. The idea, it is a very clear campaign message from both sides, from Britain Stronger In and from the Vote Leave campaign. And so as a result, we should have clarity that Theresa May and the government will seek to leave the European Union single market.
You say that, but there are an awful lot of Conservative members of Parliament who don't agree with you. There are a lot of Leavers who weren't very clear at all about whether we should leave the single market. You say that, your Brexit is like that. But there's a lot of other people who voted for Leave who didn't say it at all. Otherwise, why are we having this debate? Why isn't Theresa May saying straight away, well, it's obvious we want to leave the single market? There wouldn't be a debate about it in Parliament or anywhere. She would be able to put her cards straight out on the table if it was so obvious.
Well, the reason why we're having this debate is because people on some side of the Remain campaign haven't got to grips with the fact that the British people voted to leave on June the 23rd. It was clear during the campaign that both sides believed that a vote to leave would be a vote to leave the European Union single market. That was a clear understanding that people, whether or not it be in Wakefield or Wimbledon in the United Kingdom, knew. And as a result, they placed their vote accordingly. Now, the people have spoken. Whether Parliament chooses to tie the government's hands and chooses to tell the British people that they were wrong and that the government should negotiate a position from the Norway option or whatever. And indeed, I would say that David Cameron previously, before the campaign, said that the Norway option wouldn't work for the United Kingdom. We need to understand that Parliament would be voting against the people's decision made on June the 23rd.
Marina Niforos, how are business people understanding it? What do they think the British want?
Well, I can speak perhaps only from what I hear for the British business community. And we have seen that, for example, there was a letter addressed to Theresa May last week by about 200 business leaders, both from the Remain and the Leave campaigns, asking them for a quick and speedy resolution of the issue regarding the kickoff of the negotiations. Now, when we know...
What does that mean, a quick and speedy resolution?
It means the more protracted the discussions are about what the heart of the matter is. And going back to Rory's remark. I think beyond the political questions of whether this was the will of the people, which no one disputes that, there are serious economic ramifications that will be
Do you think Britain's
derivative of this decision. So that is not going to happen just in a yes or no vote.
Do you see Britain leaving the single market?
I think that at this point, there's tough stances on the European side. I think we saw it yesterday in the press conference that the chief negotiator, the statement, he made the first public statement since he actually was nominated,
chief
Michel
negotiator.
Barnier. And he actually shortened the timetable from the 2 years originally to the October 2018, making very clear that the European counterparts were not at all disposed to have cherry picking and to make any serious concessions before the Article 50 would be invoked.
Anaïs Raoult, what do you see right now? Do you see your British counterparts, are they bracing themselves for a departure from the single market?
No, no, our counterparts, they are actually trying to access the single market from a UK standpoint, because I represent fintech entrepreneurs, and as you know, we have a strong regulatory European compliant framework that allows entrepreneurs and their businesses to operate. So obviously our counterpart overseas are looking and hoping for direct access still to the European market. We, on our end, have a firm position, and we've been working with regulators here in France and the financial marketplace here to actually promote the attractiveness of Paris as a European compliant framework.
When you say promote the attractiveness of Paris,
yes,
are you trying to woo tech startups from London to Paris, like the financial sector is trying to do, or are you trying to do it in such a way that they can work from London and you work from Paris?
We're actually looking, well, we've had incoming calls actually, and the regulators too, from a UK-based company regulated that need to access a European market. And because they are in this gray zone, they are wondering, tomorrow, how will I keep my business? For most of them, France is the second market with more than 60 million national consumer. So.
All right, we're still in the gray zone, as Anaïs Raoult says. We'll be talking about it when we come back in the France 24 debate.